Chapter 41, Transport. The woods seem even further away. I'll need transport, Steve complained as he descended to the ground. Geosense. A subtle light burst out from under his feet and spread out as several locations around him shone green and information flooded his mind. Stand back, Steve commanded before reaching for the ground as several liquid metal-like substances began flowing out of the ground. They gathered together before they began taking shape. Steve immediately threw in 3 of the mana stones he had harvested from the boss room. At the same time too, he also added in a control chip he modified. Soon a huge vehicle was standing before him. Its tires glowed blue, suggesting that they were made of mana. Due to the large tires and the suspension, it was at least 5 inches off the ground. It was a massive truck, black, mighty, and seemed to be for military use. It was designed with only 3 things in mind: space, safety, and speed. The orbs that floated above his head quickly flew out as they attached themselves to several groves on top of the vehicle, from which they can protect the vehicle. Everyone get in, let's go, Steve ordered as the automata quickly began to get in. Steve went in last before a soft hum was heard from the vehicle before it began moving. It was fast but not astonishingly so. Steve on the other hand was within the truck, sitting on the driver's seat, or what would have been the driver's seat. He sat there simply resting as he watched the vehicle drive. The vehicle was an automata, so there was no need for a driver. He just needed to tell it where to go and it would drive there. The interior of the truck didn't have much to it. It wasn't designed for comfort, even if its available features were very comfortable to use. As the journey continued, they would at times hear the sound of explosions, but Steve chose to ignore it all. Each one was the demise of either a golem or a random creature that tried attacking them. An hour later, they finally entered the icy biome. It was exactly as Steve expected, and it was freezing cold. Thankfully the truck had thermoregulation 4, which allowed it to continue on without any problems. Okay, we're here. All combat types. Outside. We strike hard and fast. I need to leave this place by next tomorrow, Steve commanded as they all nodded before getting down from the truck. None felt the cold. Steve had his suit, which helped him regulate the cold he felt, while the automata were stones. They couldn't feel it at all. As soon as they came down, the automata immediately vanished before his eyes as they spread out to quickly conquer the place. Steve himself returned to the truck as it continued moving forward towards the boss room. He felt everything in the hands of the automata. It wasn't like he was leveling up with each kill. He didn't need to do it himself. Mr. Grant, are you there? The inspector's voice came again after so long. I am okay, just wanted to inform you that it had been a full 24 hours since you entered the gate. How are things on your end? The inspector asked. I just defeated one of the boss monsters. I'm heading towards the second. If they possess roughly the same level of power, then I should be back in like 3 hours or so. Are they that strong? Yes, but since none of us have measured, all I can do is shut up, Steve replied. Okay, I understand you. Is there anything else you would need during this time? Do you know an artifact that can fold space to allow people to store things more easily? A storage bag? Yes, something like that. Does this mean that storage bags exist? Of course, they exist. They are E-rank artifacts. Do you need one? It can't hold much, but with your powers, you may find a way. Is it something I can get how it is made, like readily? Steve asked. This was his major problem with this world. Everything was new even when he felt like he was used to it. About that, no, but if you have things you want to bring out from the gate, you can kill the bosses and then come out and take it. A cleared gate still takes about an hour before it closes. Oh, that's good then. Anyway, I'll be there soon, Steve replied before increasing the speed of the vehicle. With the back of the truck open, the automata would sometimes return and dump the core of the golems they had defeated. About an hour later, he was at the foot of the mountain. Unlike the fiery range of the UT Jin, this biome only contained one mountain, and it was the one before him. I should consider some contact lenses, Steve stated to himself as he found it difficult to see what was before him. No, he didn't need glasses, however, considering his ability, which was way more magical than actual magic itself. He may be able to create something that can let him see far into the distance or even ignore fog and the likes. He could barely make out what was in front of him due to the harsh cold weather. It didn't affect him temperature-wise thanks to the suit, but he still couldn't see. He could barely even make out the shape of the mountain, talk less of what was before him. Okay, this is ridiculous. I know you all can sense or see me. Just put down the storm and let's battle it out like real men, Steve shouted as he looked at what looked like a humanoid figure in the distance. He wasn't sure if it was one of his new enemies, but it was worth it to try. After a while, there was no response, but 2 of the drones could now be seen around his head in a circular motion. Their inbuilt sensors were far better than his own. His life senses couldn't detect anything nearby. It was all snow and rock and nothing else. His sensor systems were upgraded with the new suit, however he still couldn't feel the presence of his new enemies at all. Chapter 43, Frost Giant. Just destroy it all, Steve commanded as his floating orbs flew higher into the sky. Forming a circle, the orbs began glowing as energy clustered in between them. The higher the rose, the bigger the energy sphere between them became. Steve, on the other hand, immediately returned to the truck and took off at full speed. He knew the power of his creation. Well, he understood the level of power it should be able to output, so he didn't need to be anywhere near for now. If the enemy wanted to hide, then let it. But where can one hide if there is nothing at all? Can one exist if nothing exists? Nearly a kilometer away, Steve turned around only to see a huge energy sphere in between the orb. The sphere eclipsed the icy mountain in size and all. Even the snowstorm that prevented him from seeing seemed to have reduced. However, Steve wasn't fooled. He continued driving as fast as he could till he was sure he was well beyond the blast radius. Just as he left the area of damage, Steve heard a massive explosion as he turned around to see the mountain missing. It just wasn't there anymore. The snowstorm was gone too. In fact, the icy mountains now looked more like the icy pits. The blast had drilled a massive hole in the earth. To get a better view and to check out his spoils, Steve immediately returned to the icy mountain/pit. Holy shit! He shouted as he chuckled at the level of damage created. At least now I know I have a trump card, but you guys will need more work, Steve said as he looked at the 18 orbs that were now damaged and lying on the ground. Imagine I had a leveling system, this would have taken me to like level 100 or so, Steve stated as he jumped into the pit. He could take care of himself, so he wasn't afraid. He just preferred not to be involved in the fight from the beginning. Why take risks, when you can achieve your aim from the comfort of your couch? It was as simple as that. However, something did bother him. He didn't have a way to confirm that the boss was dead. We grant you safe passage and you slaughter my people, a new voice was soon heard as his heart sank. Without any hesitation or even care to know who it was, Steve immediately melted the rock around him as a sword was formed. He only had one single weapon on him, and that was his handgun. The remaining 2 orbs weren't on him at the moment, and his automata were still clearing the golem and other creatures within the biome. Turning around, Steve finally saw the owner of the voice. It was a giant. Standing at a height of about 3 meters, 9 feet 9 inches foot, its skin was blue and ice-like. It possessed white hair. The creature looked like what he would expect a frost giant from Norse mythology to look like. However, at the moment, it wasn't looking so graceful. Its arm was twisted in an unnatural way, its head broken open as clear liquid flowed down his face. However, at the same time too, he could also see all its injuries healing at a visible pace. Chapter 44, Battle? So this is a boss monster. Cheating doesn't really allow you tell how powerful one is, Steve commented as he continued staring at the massive beast. I see, you killed UT-kun, a human running on borrowed power, the frost giant said as snow and ice began to cover the area again. Even within his suit, which offered near perfect protection from cold or heat, he could still feel the cold. Thanks for noticing. I will need to harvest your materials as well soon, Steve replied before vanishing from his spot. Clang. Swords clashed before Steve was sent flying back. Repositioning himself in the air, Steve landed on his feet as he prepared for the incoming attack. Clang. A second clash as Steve was pushed back but quickly began to input more mana into his suit as he felt even more power flow into his body. I see, but it makes no difference, the frost giant said as it stuck out again. Jumping out of the way, Steve quickly molded the blade into a pair of knuckle dusters as he punched out. He may be the villain here. At least in the frost giant's book, he was, but he didn't plan to kill it quickly. He needed to test his new suit. With a single jab to the face, the creature was sent flying, but Steve didn't let up, adding in more mana to his suit. He vanished from his spot. Snow flew into the air as craters were formed, but Steve still didn't let up. You guys locked me in here for 2 months. 2 fucking months. I ate fucking sand in my first week here, Steve shouted as he continued hitting the long-dead frost giant. My lord, a voice called out. Asterisk bam? Asterisk. My lord. Bam? My lord. The voice called again but much louder. What? Steve answered as he turned to see the first standing and looking at him. It's dead, my lord first answered while pointing at the bloody mess that was in the crater. Shit, he cussed as he finally moved away from the crater. Harvest it and do the same to the others, he ordered as he left to return to his truck. He had overdone it. Returning back to the truck, he didn't exactly know how to feel. He couldn't lie that he had gained a lot within this dungeon, but he was still locked in here. If not for the automata, he couldn't even sleep properly. He barely ate anything during his first few weeks. There wasn't even anything to eat. The lava was too hot for any other thing other than an elemental to survive there. The only other beings were the UT-Jin, but they almost never left their base. He wasn't stupid to attack them while they were together. The one he had attacked nearly killed him. Turns out that all this time had affected him much more than he thought. Time passed and before he knew it, another pile of materials were ready. As he suspected from beating up the frost giant boss, they were much more durable than the UT-Jin. Their skin radiated an unnatural level of cold even while dead. The UT-Jin didn't have much of a durable body, but their skin radiated the same level of heat. Turning to the last biome within the gate, he wondered what he would meet there. It was the most unknown area in this gate and the one place he didn't know anything about. Chapter 45, Forest Biome. Are you all done? Steve asked as he saw the last set of automata returning to the truck. Yes, my lord. Then let's go, Steve ordered as the automata saluted and took their positions in the truck. Soon the vehicle booted up as it sped through the ice-covered lands towards the forest biome. Steve didn't know why but had a bad feeling about that area. He didn't know if it was his intuition or just an irrational fear within him, but everything in him refused to go there. However, he didn't have much of a choice if he wanted to sleep on a warm bed soon. As the truck sped forward, Steve sat in the back as he created several drums. 3 of them to be specific, in each he put the leather from the creature killed. Using his abilities, he powderized the mixture and adding a bit more power he turned the mixture into a weird sticky substance. Of course this wasn't a normal way of storing or even creating threads for his new suit, but it was how spiders made silk. He planned to copy that to create the new suit. He didn't know what he would face in this new biome, but he knew it was definitely going to be much stronger than both the UT-Jin and the frost giants. He couldn't sense anything within the forest biome. His detection abilities offered very long range, however. So far he had yet to sense even one living being within the forest. That was the main problem. Forests are naturally alive, trees are alive, there should be small critters here and there, but his scans showed absolutely nothing. To his scans, the entire forest biome was nothing more than a wasteland, but to his eyes, it was a vibrant biome. He didn't know what he would face, but he knew that overwhelming strength could overcome all. His current suit may work, but he didn't plan to take any chances at all. After he created the sticky silk, he immediately closed them and let it be. There were 3 biomes in this place. He had gathered material from 2 of them. If he wanted to create the ultimate suit, then he needed material from the forest biome. The UT-Jin used fire and earth to create lava. The frost giants used water and air to create snow or ice, so it would be perfect mix of element, but only God knew what was the forest biome. Since he wanted to be on the safe side, he wanted to also mix in some forest biome materials because he had no idea what elements they used. The truck sped through the ice at speeds that should be impossible considering its size and what it carried. 2 days later, Steve was standing before the massive forest. The snowfields had come to an end and from there began the forest. It was too impossible, but it was what he was seeing. Okay, Scout Teams 1 and 2, I apologize for using Yule as the gunny pigs, but go in, kill anything you see and bring back its body, Steve ordered as he stood on the truck. Aye, sir. Several automata answered. They were the scout builds. He had created them to be vastly lighter than the others. They weren't as powerful, but they could surely escape anything that didn't outclass them excessively. Chapter 46, Scouts. With their confirmation, the teams of 4 rushed into the forest. Steve and the rest of the automata waited for them at the entrance of the forest. Waving his hand in the air, a holographic screen appeared. It was large enough to cover his vision entirely. Through it he was able to see what the 8 scouts were up to. Mr. Grant, are you still there? The familiar voice came through the earpiece. Huh. Oh, Mr. Jin Chul, I had completely forgotten that you were there. That is understandable considering the time difference, but I wanted to know how things are going on that side. I would say great. I have beaten the second boss. It remains the last biome, but I am not sure. Hey, can you send me a list of every woodland creature you guys have found in a gate? You mean monsters we found in forest-type gates? Yes, can you do that? I have a feeling that this last boss would be something else compared to the other 2 I initially faced, Steve said. Okay, I will see what I can do, but if possible can you also transmit images of the last boss you beat? We still need to update our records. That would be impossible. Why? I may or may not have let out my frustration on the creature. I see. Anyway, if possible send us images and if possible a short description of their abilities so we can prepare for future events. I'll see what I can do, Steve replied before the 2 of them cut the connection. Okay then, be careful, Jin Chul said before the connection was cut. Turning his attention back to the screens before him, he could see that 4 out of the 8 had been mysteriously put out of commission. Even during the call, he still saw it. Their cameras had just stopped transmitting, and as for the other 4, they were engaged in combat but as a team. 2 of them were missing an arm, the other had a part of its face broken. The enemy on the other hand was a large humanoid creature that looked like it was wearing armor. The creature had shrubs growing from its back and all over its body. A treant? Steve asked. At this point he couldn't be sure of anything yet. The creature was ridiculously powerful and was making quick work of his automata, and worse, he couldn't sense it, even know that its location had been given away. Scout Team 2, that's a treant. Use fire to attack, Steve ordered through his connection to them. Aye, sir. They replied. As soon as they did so, Steve saw most of their bodies lit up in flames, even to the extent of creating a large pillar of fire within the forest. Seeing this, Steve smiled. The treant was a tree. A sentient tree, but still a tree at the end of the day. With their new advantage, the scouts began to gain the advantage in the battle. However, no matter how Steve saw it, the treant didn't look that much affected by the fire. Package confirmed, sir, we're en route. Well done, bring it in, Steve replied as he got ready to analyze what materials the treant was made from. It looked like it was made from wood, but even so that didn't explain why it didn't burn. It may have been weakened by the fire, but there was no burn marks anyway on it, at least from the video feeds he could see. Chapter 47, version 2.0. About 30 minutes later, the scouts were back, and with them was the dead body of the treant. Its colorful nature was gone due to the fire burns, but the material itself wasn't harmed. Even dead, it's still strong enough to resist a snap, Steve said, impressed. He was trying to break off one of the many twigs on the creature's body, but no matter what he did, he couldn't do so. Dismantle. Steve used his abilities as he quickly began to take the creature apart. The tree creature was saturated with mana and some other energy he had yet to actually figure out. And apart from that, it didn't have a core, which meant that it wasn't a golem or something like that. No, it was even weirder. Even monsters had cores. The UT Jin and the Frost Giants had cores, but this tree didn't. The more he learned about the creature, the more he feared going into the forest. Neither he or his automata had the senses to detect them, but they could sense him. They already had the surprise factor down, and on top of that, they also had superior durability and strength. As strong as he was in the suit, he knew that if the automata couldn't do anything to them, then he too wouldn't be able to do anything. Anyway, thank you for donating yourself to making me stronger, Steve said before liquefying it as well. He quickly mixed it with the other mixture. He didn't know what element or attribute the treant would add to the suit, but he desperately needed all he could get at the moment. Steve spent several minutes stirring and ensuring that the mix was done properly. After that he used his ability to bring forth a thin strand of sticky substance from the large vat. Bringing out 2 more, he began twisting them and brought out more until they were the size of a standard thread before he began using it to weave. Hours passed as Steve continued working as the automata protected him. He wasn't wearing a suit for the first time since he entered the gate. Even if he was barely outside the forest biome, it had the most normal temperature with this entire gate. A/N, for the confused ones, this is exactly how spider silk is created. It exists as liquid within them and then they basically drag it out like slime to create their webs. So this is about 15 times stronger than a normal mixture of the materials. Thankfully though, it seemed as though the treants were unable to leave the forest. Times. Name, Hunter Suit V2.0. Item type, Bodysuit, Combat. Material, Artificial Silk, S++. Attributes, Protection V, Thermoregulation V, Physical Strengthening V, Comfort V, Perception V, Elemental Magic V, Soul Perception 4. Description. A combat suit created from the materials harvested from Baron's Gate. The suit grants its user impossible strength, speed, and stamina as long as they possess mana. It also grants its user a host of other abilities such as Elemental Magic V and Soul Affinity 3, an improved sensory ability as well as an innate communication network. World rank? Times. Baron. That should be the name of the dungeon boss, Steve thought after inspecting the new suit. It looked just like the rest of the suits he had created so far, however the power he felt from the suit was something else. He couldn't exactly tell what it was before, but now it was self-explanatory. Chapter 48, Soul Affinity. Soul Perception, allows the user of this ability to perceive spiritual/soul energy. Also allows one to perceive emotions as auras as well. Soul affinity, he who works with the spirit shall be touched by the spirit, allows the user to absorb a portion of a soul's energy under the condition that they die by the user's hand it was soul energy. They didn't have cores because they had souls instead. A core and a soul did the exact same thing. Cores were in simple terms, the core hardware and programming of a creature. A soul held the essence of a human or a living being. The treant were closer to a human than an actual monster. If the treant could somehow manipulate their souls or at least the energy of the soul, then they surely could hide their life signs even from his sensors. Wait, does that mean that they can perform soul attacks? Steve asked as he pondered over his new discovery. Mr. Jin Chul, are you there? Steve said into the earpiece. Hello, I'm still here, what's going on? No, nothing, I just wanted to ask, has the association ever encountered any creature that can manipulate souls? Souls? Yes, I mean like they can physically interact with souls and the likes. Oh, well there was the non-morty in Italy, but I am not really sure if that will fit what you want. Doesn't matter, what was it like? It was an undead that could create more undead. We aren't really sure if it was manipulating souls or just animating the skeletons. Huh. Anyway, thank you, Steve said as he cut the connection. It seems he couldn't get any help from the association on this one. He didn't need an if on this one. Thinking about it again, he quickly turned to the large vat and took out a handful which he hardened and used to make new chips or cores for the automata. He couldn't lie to himself and say that he didn't need them. They were literally the only reason he had survived for so long. If he didn't create first when he did, he would have died on the first night. He didn't have any past military or combat experience to use. He was a homebody, so his habits still remained. He slept as soon as it was 11 o'clock a.m. Well, not anymore, but as of then he did, but the monsters didn't, so he would be dead by now if not for them. After making the new cores, he immediately distributed it to the automata. If they were going to be useful, then they needed to be able to sense and fight against these soul-manipulating trees. After that, he immediately put on the new suit as he felt a whole new kind of power permeate through his body. It felt as though he was on top of the world. His strength was like nothing he had experienced previously, and he had literally created 3 earlier versions of this same suit. Chapter 49, Sleep. His body itched to rush into the main forest area to battle, but he knew that he wouldn't survive it. Well, he wasn't really sure, but it was best to be cautious. Activating his scans, he could see several hundreds of the treants standing in wait just at the edge of the forest. In fact, the entire forest was crawling with them. Ha ha ha. Steve laughed out loud. He truly didn't have the element of surprise at all on his side, and even so, he was really lucky that they, for some reason, refused to leave the actual forest itself. All along the edge of the forest, he could sense them. There were hundreds of them, all seemingly ready to attack at any point in time, but still waited within the forest for him to enter. Cold sweat poured down his back at the thought of what would have been if their weird rule wasn't in place. At least this proves that the scans work, Steve noted as he sat back. If he once felt sleepy, that was gone now. How could he even sleep when he could sense hundreds of enemies watching his every movie? The automata, with the new upgrade to their sensors, became much more hostile, which was to be expected after all they were surrounded. The night passed peacefully and in a very calm manner. The next morning, Steve found himself with blood-red eyes as his brain and body demanded sleep. He still wasn't used to staying awake for so long, so things like these were expected. Deciding not to be foolish anymore, he got into the truck along with all his automata and drove off. Driving far into the icy lands, the truck was finally stopped as he finally went to bed. The automata didn't need sleep, nor were they even capable of it, so they were in charge of ensuring they weren't being followed. Don't forget that they are trees. Use fire against them, Steve shouted as he raised his handgun and took aim. Before them were several enemies. The treants attacked in groups, not giving the opponent the chance to recover in any way. With his handgun and enhanced accuracy thanks to the suit, he was able to blow the head of one of the treants clean off. The treant stood up despite the obvious missing vital body part before rushing towards him almost as though the head didn't matter. His floating orbs did their work of protecting perfectly, but there were too many opponents. Coating his fists in mana due to the lack of a secondary weapon, Steve entered a battle of attrition with the damaged treant. It was much more durable than he was, but his attacks dealt more damage than it could muster. As the treant swung out, Steve ducked, quickly delivering a swift jab to its torso and another. Even with his fists coated in mana and his strength enhanced by the suit, it still felt like he was punching a brick wall. Even the stone golem didn't feel this tough. Ignoring his attacks, the treant clasped its palms together and slammed down, but before the attack could reach him, Steve vanished, reappearing above the creature. It was way more durable, but he was much faster than it. As he made his way to its back, he pulled out his handgun again as he shot the creature from the back. Chapter 50, 28 HRS. As a tree, the treant's vitality was unmatched, so Steve unleashed more and more shots at the treant until he was sure it was dead. However, he had no time to rest as he quickly grabbed hold of the severed hand of the creature and molded that into a sword. Using his newly acquired weapon to block an incoming strike from one of the treants before one of the orbs blew its head off and shot it once again to ensure its death. The battle continued with Steve's life being out constantly in danger even if he was in a supposed safe area. Within the forest, it was either fight or die. The automata on the other hand weren't faring all that well as their numbers dropped rapidly. From the initial 150, he now had around 126 automata that were in battle-ready condition. Sparks and fires lit up the forest as Steve and his group did all they could to cut down the treant. However, even fires weren't exactly that much a weakness that could be exploited. Even in the right conditions, fires didn't last more than a minute within the forest and the treants didn't seem that much affected by it. It didn't reduce their performance one bit. However, using a heated weapon ensured that the treant wouldn't be able to regenerate. At least they wouldn't be able to do so for the cut-off part. The battle continued for a while before Steve ordered a retreat. He was uninjured, but the battle was weighing on his mind. The automata needed no sleep or rest, but he needed their protection. Returning back to the truck, he quickly got in and as soon as he touched the bed, he fell asleep. Meanwhile, within the forest, a large number of treants appeared within the clearing they had been in. It was a battle they couldn't win. The nutrients picked up their brethren and took their dead bodies deeper into the forest while new ones replaced them in wait for the intruder. Outside the gate, Jin Chul and the rest of the association members still remained in wait. It was already over 24 hours since the red gate formed, but they weren't allowed to leave the area. All around them were several reporters and news vans, all pushing to know more about the gate. A red gate was great news for any publisher. If the victims of the gate clears it, then they had the scope of a lifetime and had secured a future news source. If the victims didn't survive it, then they would make do with what they have for now. The association hunters created a large barricade stopping them from getting too close. This was done should there be a dungeon break. It would give the hunters available time to defeat the creatures before they spread out. I never thought the association would also run into these kinds of problems. A voice was heard as Jin Chul turned towards the source. It was a man standing at a height of about 6 feet tall, closing in on 7. The man had red hair that was somehow natural. The man looked normal until one stared into his eyes. Chapter 51, S ranks. His eyes shone bright with no pupils at all. Dressed in a suit, it was easy to tell the man wasn't normal. Mr. Beak, you know, thank you for coming, Jin Chul said in a serious manner as he stretched out his arm for a handshake. As serious as always, it is an S-rank gate after all. My presence is needed whether I like it or not. Still, thank you for coming. The chairman is on his way here, so please bear with us for now. The chairman. Oh, now this is interesting. Who is inside there? Baek Yuno asked. That information cannot be relayed to you at the moment, Jin Chul replied before bowing and leaving. He had other matters to attend to. Baek Yuno stood and watched as he left. Seeing the hunter's attitude, a smile began to form on his face. The association never classifies information unless it was incredibly important, which meant that whatever team was within the gate was very important to them. Of course, the beast would get here first. A new voice was heard as more camera flashes were seen. It was a lanky young man with actual red hair with half the muscles of the first man. However, his aura and presence was just as strong. Choi Jong-in, Baek Yuno said as he rolled his eyes. The two men stared at each other for a while before turning to the massive red gate that was before them. Unlike when it was unentered, it stood at a height of more than 10 feet tall and was about 3 meters wide. The gate was intimidating, but the mana they felt from it was way more so than normal. The association is really taking this one seriously, aren't they? Choi Jong-in asked. However, all he got in reply was silence as none paid attention to him anymore. Following them were a few more other people, all with impressive auras surrounding them. This is turning out to be a spectacle, Jin Chul thought as he tapped on the earpiece hoping that Steve would answer. However, nothing came through. The line was dull. He didn't know how this thing worked because he had only gotten across to the other side once. Communication was usually initiated by Steve, not him. So hearing nothing from the other side, he decided to be patient and hope for the best. Meanwhile, inside the gate, the man in question could be seen rolling around his bed. His bones shifted even within his body. The pain assaulted his mind that even in an unconscious state, he quickly removed his suit. His flesh tore off with his suit. His bones moved around within his body, flesh fell off as his muscles failed and sagged. It was a horrifying sight to look at. However, the man going through it somehow remained unconscious. Blood filled the truck, but somehow he wasn't dead yet. It was bizarre to look at or even know of. No automaton entered the truck, so none of them could help him out of his current situation. Soon he was named with his flesh melting off his bones and blood laying down in his pool of blood. Chapter 52, Reborn. The unknowing would think him dead, however. His life signs didn't weaken, rather they got stronger. From his bones, come forth new muscles, and from that came new skin. Steve was reborn anew. His flesh looked like that of a newborn. The many blemishes and scars on his body from the gate raids his body may have gone through before his entrance into this world was gone. An hour later, Steve was back to normal, but his melted off flesh and blood could still be seen on the floor of the truck. The scene wasn't one for the weak-willed, but thankfully Steve was still asleep and the automata were busy protecting the truck. There were no more changes as peace descended on the area. The noise heard was reduced down to a bare minimum. The automata performed regular patrols around the truck. The treants remained steadfast in their wait for their opponents to enter into the forest, all over again. Hours passed like this until the silence was finally broken. A certain someone had woken up in his pool of blood. What the FK? Steve shouted as he jumped up from the bed as he used his abilities to quickly remove the blood from his body. Seeing the things before him, his mind ran through several options, but first he quickly began to check his body for any injuries to know if the blood belonged to him. He found none, which immediately put him at ease. Whatever this was probably a monster that escaped the automata, but he destroyed it in his sleep, or the automata noticed it before it could do anything. Wait, why am I naked? Steve asked when he finally noticed his nakedness. Something must have happened, but he couldn't tell what it was. He had nothing to use to find out. The automata were busy outside the truck patrolling. His orbs were protecting him from above the truck. He was in here alone and the truck didn't have any form of interior camera. He didn't design it to have one, after all he never thought he would be using it. After a brief moment of thinking, he decided to just let it be and put on his clothes. Grabbing his suit, which was tossed aside, he immediately put it on. However, for some reason, the suit felt smaller for some reason. He couldn't tell what it was exactly, but it seemed to have shrunk for some reason. Dismissing it in favor for more important things like getting out of the gate, he injected his mana into the suit and it immediately expanded to fit him better. He sized himself up very well on a shiny metallic surface within the truck that was designed to act as a mirror for him. The expanded suit fit him well, but he noticed a few differences. Did I grow taller? Steve asked himself. He didn't have any way to exactly know if his assumption was true or not, but he felt different for some reason. He didn't know how, but he just felt better. He felt good about himself today. He may not know why, but things were really looking good for him. With a shrug, he turned to leave only to see the bloody mess just by his bed. It was disturbing to look at, and though he didn't know what had created the mess, as long as he was safe, he couldn't care less what it was. Chapter 53, Flamethrower. If it was some form of psychological warfare by the treants, then it wasn't working. As long as they didn't attack him, then it didn't matter to him. All he had to do was to fortify the truck and his defenses better. Using his abilities, he cleaned up the mess. It was more annoying to him than it was disturbing. He had seen a lot of blood and gore within the last month that this was just another dead creature. He turned it all into a flesh ball that he wrapped in an air bubble using wind magic and burnt to a crisp using fire magic. After that he poured the ashes away from the truck. Now it was time to wash up as he quickly rushed into the prepared shower in the large truck. He may have removed the blood and other body fluid from his body, but he still felt irritated. He put the suit into the washer and then began scrubbing his body to remove anything that may have remained behind. He spent nearly an hour doing so before finally stepping out. The suit was already dry before he stepped out due to the magical nature of the washer. All he had to do was actually put it on and he was ready. Soon the truck, along with all its guards, the automata, were on their way back to the forest, now equipped with a flamethrower. Steve was ready for the treants. First he needed to get back to them for the bloody mess they had left in his truck, then he also needed to quickly destroy the final boss monster of the gate so he could finally leave the gate. Incoming projectile Steve heard from his orbs. Looking out he saw a massive object flying towards them. It was high in the air, but somehow he could see it clearly. It was a massive tree stump. Take care of it, Steve said before he heard a small explosion as the stump was blown to smithereens. Looking out for more, Steve saw 3 more being launched into the sky from the forest biome. The treants were smarter than they looked. Normally he worried about how they knew he was coming, but they just left a pile of dead carnage in his truck, so he didn't think too much of it. He expected the ambushes. As they advanced, his drones worked to clear the skies while his automata kept watch for any ground assault. He advanced smoothly through the ice-covered fields even if they encountered no ground resistance. Arriving at the forest, Steve didn't wait before he immediately activated the massive cannon-shaped device at the top of his truck. Activate shield, Steve shouted as a soft hum was heard before one could see a visible energy field appear around the truck before disappearing. With the shield activated, the cannon-like device immediately came to life as massive balls of fire were thrown out of its barrel at incredibly high speeds. It was as though a cannon had been equipped with an automatic feature. Anywhere the fireballs touched was immediately reduced to a massive crater in the ground. Chapter 54, Threat to the Environment. If fire was a major flaw of these treants, then he might as well burn the entire forest to the ground. It wasn't like anyone needed it. Fires formed all over the forest, but Steve drove through without a care in the world. The automata got down and began to defend the truck as Steve manually took control of his flamethrower. He shot randomly all around the forest, all with the aim of causing as many fires as possible, and the area around them was slowly beginning to look like the volcanic biome. The ground was slowly turning red as the rock underneath them was slowly turning to lava due to the extremely hot flames. This thing is more powerful than I thought, Steve thought. It was a last-minute preparation for battle, for he had created it on a whim, but it was better designed and more powerful than he thought it should be. And it consumes just as much mana as my suit, Steve noted. Looking below him, he could see several of his automata fighting against the treants who wanted to destroy his weapon of mass destruction. They stood no chance. Today is really going my way, Steve noted as he continued shooting even if he felt weird for some reason. Even if he was using his mana at double the normal rate, he still wasn't feeling tired. Instead, he felt as though his body was being rejuvenated each second. It made no sense, but it was one that worked in his favor for this moment, so he planned to use it while it lasted. Choosing to shift the thought for investigation later, he continued to dutifully destroy the environment. Hours passed, but he still performed at full efficiency. The entire forest was nearly covered in fire, but they had barely advanced past the middle of the forest. The treants seemed to have suddenly gained some form of immunity to the fire around them, so put up a much difficult battle, but the explosive nature of each fireball was still enough to destroy them. His mana seemed to be infinite even if he had been doing twice as much work than normal. He barely felt any form of fatigue, which was honestly a good thing for their current predicament. Using his sensors, Steve could sense thousands if not millions of treants rushing towards them. They gathered from all parts of the forest to eradicate their problem. Normally he would be overwhelmed, but he wasn't feeling so. Instead he felt stronger, faster, smarter. It was a bizarre feeling, but it was how he felt at the moment. He would investigate, but any distraction would result in his death. Auto! Steve shouted as he removed his hands from the controls of the flamethrower. In doing so, the flamethrower seemed to have gained life of its own as it automatically shot at the enemy on its own. Meanwhile, Steve quickly jumped out of the truck as he immediately took several steps to the sky. It was the only place he believed he would be safe enough to check his status page. Chapter 55, Change his name, Stephen Grant. Age, 35. Title, Architect's Protege. Mana, 200,000. Abilities. Protege of the Architect. Architect's Touch. Soul Perception, allows the user of this ability to perceive spiritual/soul energy. Also allows one to perceive emotions as auras as well. New. Soul Affinity, he who works with the spirit shall be touched by the spirit. Allows the user to absorb a portion of a soul's energy under the condition that they die by the user's hand. New. Heiaya, blessed one of the spirits shall possess a body equal to the spirits. Allows the user to permanently convert energy into physical power. Currently on default, the user is unable to take control. New. Times. I gained new abilities. Steve questioned himself as he dodged a tree stump that was thrown at him from below. He couldn't recall using a runestone or even seeing one at all within the dungeon. If he remembered correctly, according to the Association Handbook, there were only 2 ways one could gain new abilities. One of them was by being reawakened and the other was to use a runestone. He didn't believe he had gone through any of that. He may be considered a reawakener, but he knew he had no magical abilities to begin with, so his run-in with the monsters in that dungeon awakened him. Which meant that he just underwent a reawakening since he knew that he had yet to see a single runestone. However, even that theory was challenged by the fact that 2 of his new abilities came from his suit. He didn't understand how his abilities allowed him to create abilities in the first place, but it all worked via intent, and as long as he had a rough imaging and understanding of how the ability worked, he could add it to his suit. However, both soul perception and soul affinity were not abilities he had created, they had appeared on the suit on their own. He had dismissed it as a byproduct of the materials used, but turns out it was more than that. Wait, does that mean that the more I kill, the stronger I get? Isn't that just a natural leveling system? Steve asked as it finally dawned on him. That was why he had felt stronger as time progressed, that was why his mana wasn't running out. Times. Mana, 200,000, plus 2,000. Times. Holy shit. Steve cussed as a huge smile bloomed on his face, looking down at his automatons, all of which were swimming through the thousands of treants that wanted them dead. Both sides felt no pain or fatigue, but one side had ever regenerating mana to the point of it seeming infinite. I should be physically as strong as them now, right? Steve asked, dodging what looked like a wooden branch. Turning to the source of the arrow, he saw a group of treants far away from the main group of attacking ones. Each of them was carrying something of some kind to throw at him. Their aim wasn't good, but the strength behind each throw was frightening. At least it once was. Now Steve simply saw it as something he would eventually get to. Worse, he saw the treants as nothing but prey. Chapter 56, Level Up? Your souls shall be mine. That came out wrong. Become my XP. Steve laughed as he unleashed a massive fireball towards them. At the same time, he let go of his footing as he enhanced his suit and began free fall. He could come down slowly and more gently, but why do that when you could cause more damage than necessary? As soon as he touched the ground, a massive explosion was heard as a huge clearing was formed. Within it, there was only him and nothing else. The group was dead, but he could feel it now. A new form of energy invaded his body just before he felt a weird refreshing feeling. It was bizarre to think of and even more so to actually witness in action. He had just metabolized the souls of these creatures. It was only a small percentage of it, but it was still a soul nonetheless. Ethically and morally speaking, this was bad and could result in future problems for him, but who was talking about ethics here? His food for so long had been fellow humanoid creatures. This gate had completely changed him. As for the problems he may cause in the future, he would think of that later. Following common sense, he should be expecting some genetic mutations due to absorbing their souls. He couldn't care about that now though, he just needed to use this to his advantage to get out of here. Reaching down to where his pockets would be, he picked out two small daggers. They weren't the ideal weapon for him, but at the moment, the goal wasn't safety. It was simply to cause as much death as possible. With a single step, Steve vanished from the area as the ground broke into several pieces. Long silvery lights flashed through the forest as several treants were cut down. He advanced deeper and deeper into the forest as he faced off against the treants with more ease than normal. He felt himself grow much stronger with each kill. Even without augmenting his suit, he was capable of generating a lot of power that matched it. Thankfully, the suit was designed to enhance the natural physical strength of his body rather than just adding more strength to him. It wasn't designed with fixed parameters, it was designed to continually boost his abilities at all times. The metal of the dagger reflected the sunlight, creating several bright flashes of light as a treant was killed each time. On another side of the forest, the automata could be seen swimming through the waves of treants that attacked them. Their nature as an automata made them almost impossible to kill. Steve had reinforced their stone armor so they were even stronger than before. The battle continued for hours with neither side backing down. Steve and his automaton had the stamina and overwhelming power while the treants seemed to have the numbers. They were never ending even after all this. The moon was high up in the sky when he finally reached the center of the forest. His entire body was covered in glowing white substance, tree sap. Chapter 57, Side Effects, Good or Bad. Each of his steps shook the ground even more than he wanted. The amount of power flowing through his limbs was astonishing. He felt like the Hulk that had the power to break worlds. It was an intoxicating feeling, but he had no time for it to affect him mentally. He had too many things to think about at the moment. Majorly the side effects of him absorbing the soul of a tree. He was already feeling it. His body felt powerful, but his mind felt at peace even in this war. Not because of his newfound power, but because it felt as though he was in his element. He could more easily sense the treants now even without his scanners. Well, to be more accurate, his body seemed to just know when any form of plant life was close by. Above all, his eyes had turned green. The mutations weren't much, but he could tell that it would grow the more he absorbed. That was what worried him. There was also the fact that he was now becoming much more perceptive to the once mysterious entity known as souls. He didn't know if it was the skill soul perception or if it was due to absorbing them for nearly an entire day now, but he could sense them much more easily. This forest was saturated with soul energy. It was everywhere, almost as though death itself resided within the center of the forest. That fact alone made him remain where he was. Is this red gate some kind of incubation place for some god? Steve asked as he sat down beside a tree. He felt no danger or soul around him. It was as though the treants feared him. Or at least they feared whatever it was that was at the center of the forest. He could sense them just standing and watching him, but none of them were making a move even if he could feel the very anger within their souls. First, I'm making my location. Fight your way to this location. It seems to be some kind of safe zone or something, Steve set out to no one in particular. Affirmative, sir. We are on our way, Steve heard the familiar voice say before the connection was cut. Now it was time to wait. He was now much more powerful, but he definitely wasn't stepping out there alone. First and the rest of the automata took over an hour to fight their way to the center of the forest. Many of them had missing parts, first being one of them. His arm was missing from the shoulder downward and many claw marks could be seen on his body. Many of the other automata had their heads crushed or were missing a leg or had a hole in their body. You could tell just how gruesome the battle was, but at the same time, if the winning part was like this, then how would the losing party be? You guys have really been through a lot, Steve joked as he began repairs while the healer-type automata began healing him as well. He didn't believe it was needed, but who knows, he may actually need it. After he was done with repairs, he and the team sat in wait. He felt the need to prepare his mind for whatever that was to come. Chapter 58, Preparation. This gate has been too bizarre for him to acknowledge it as normal. He had read most things concerning the Hunter Society. The gates and all but this gate was a bit different. It wasn't strange for a red gate to have more than one bosses, but he has never heard of 3 separate biomes or even monsters that could be reasoned with. This was the most disturbing part of it all. He may have ignored it then, but it never stopped chipping at his mind. We grant you safe passage and you slaughter my people. In this gate, he had met a monster or a group of monsters that actively avoided people. Within this same gate, he had come in contact with a monster race that had souls instead of a magic stone. The gate definitely wasn't normal no matter what angle he used to think about it. It was common knowledge that all monsters wanted every human dead, so they attacked anyone and everyone within sight. All this just because I wanted live data to work on to improve this stupid suit, Steve complained. It was starting to look like he was some sort of bad luck magnet. First it was the double dungeon and now a red gate that was beyond normal. While he lamented his luck, he also prepared for what was to come. If the treants with their impressive regeneration and power didn't want to get close to the center, then surely whatever was there was much stronger than anything they had faced. With that though, he went into the truck was now had several deep battle scars on it. However, he repaired all of those very quickly before he began gathering materials again. This time he wanted to make weapons. He wasn't a dagger guy, it just happens to be the closest weapon to him whenever he needed to fight in combat. Taking some bones from both the UT Jin and the Frost Giants, he also took a few broken off parts of the treants before he began crafting. Making the base or handle of the sword using the treants wood, he mixed the 2 bones to create a long blade. He added every single ability he could think of that would serve well with a sword to the newly created blade. Name, nil. Material, anima. Attributes, cutting V, soul sever V. Adaptive edge V, durability V. Description. A sword created by the architect's protege, Steve Grant, using a mixture of materials found with Baron's Gate and soul energy. Designed to cut all including the soul. World rank, times. This should do it, Steve said as he picked up the newly created sword. It was about 1 meter and some inches long, its blade shone bright blue even under the bright rays of the sun. The sword didn't weigh much in his hand and felt comfortable to hold. To test it out, he stood up and immediately began to practice a kata he had learned from trainer. The sword did well in his hand, so it was just right for him, and besides it also came with a lot of abilities that would help him in this battle. He didn't know how the boss would be, but he did know that it definitely dealt with souls, so a sword that cuts souls was absolutely needed. Chapter 59, Preparation 2. He practiced for about 30 minutes before he finally sat down back. He was now sure that the sword was perfect. Creating a sword wasn't just about sticking a blade on a handle, one also needed to account for its weight distribution, its length, etc. Those were what made a sword. A sword that was too long would be too heavy to lift and unbalanced, which would make the wielder's strikes slow. A heavy sword wouldn't be able to be lifted. A sword that was too light would be free in the wielder's hand. Since all tests were done, he used the rest of the material to create a scabbard for the sword. After that he began repairs to his suit, even if there was barely anything to repair. The suit's base defenses were barely breached during the battle, so there really wasn't anything to repair, but Steve knew that any mistake on his part could be the difference between life or death. His preparations went on till night, but Steve was still unable to sleep. In fact, he didn't feel the need to sleep at all. He didn't know if this was due to nervousness or just a side effect of the soul absorption. He wasn't feeling any fatigue of any kind, nor was his mind weary. He felt at tip-top shape with more energy coursing through his veins than normal. Hopefully this doesn't affect me later on, Steve said as he chuckled. At the moment, it was a good thing, because who knew what the treants would do when he goes to sleep? Wait, now that I think of it, was that bloody mess caused by the soul absorption? He asked out loud. The more he thought about it now, the more it made sense. He was unnaturally sleepy when he returned back to the truck the day before. The treants also remained in the forest even after he woke up, so there was no way it was them who did that. The only reasonable explanation would be the absorption of souls. It conditioned his body to fit the role of a soul absorber. That means less negative side effects, Steve noted as he thought of all the side effects he had noticed so far. None of them were bad enough for him to consider them a negative side effect. Most of them were positive. Even his lack of sleep could be considered positive because of his current situation. Throughout the night, Steve stayed awake imagining every possible scenario he could think of that would take place during the fight. He hadn't met the boss yet, so he had no idea what the boss was like, but he could at least prepare for a really powerful monster. The next day, he was up and about again, but this time, preparation was done and he was ready to face off against the beast that was the last boss. Thankfully, he had the element of surprise on his side. Even if the boss was very powerful, that would help to weaken him a bit before the actual battle. With that thought in mind, he divided the automaton into 2 groups. One was to focus on long range using the new snipers he made last night, and the other was to fight with him. Chapter 60, Last Boss. That should be all. Let's move out, Steve commanded before they left. The truck was left behind as there was no point in taking it towards the boss. The noise would only alert the enemy to their presence, that's if it hadn't already sensed his soul. Steve walked towards the very center of the forest, with his sword in hand and his mana ready to augment his already absurd physical levels at any moment. His scanners were on full range and active. He didn't want to get caught off guard because that would mean his death. No creature within a dungeon aims to just knock back the hunter. They aim to kill, so he wouldn't be knocked back. He would be either stabbed or his head would be smashed in. At the moment though, he very much liked his life. He was rich in this world, and if he leaves this godforsaken gate, he would be even richer. Maybe compete with a small country in terms of wealth, or even challenge the big leagues after his company is born. This life was the best he had. It was his second chance. With a determined look on his face and a resolved heart, Steve marched on. Soon they chanced upon a clearing. It was huge. Huge enough that it should be seen from an aerial view, but it was not. This should be where the boss resides, Steve said before immediately ordering the sniper team to spread out and take position. Only a fool would try to fight fair against a gate boss. That was only for bastards who wanted to die early. As they took position in various areas, all around the clearing, Steve looked forward to try and analyze his enemy. He still had the element of surprise, hopefully. As he looked further into the clearing, he saw what looked like an egg just stilling there. Even from his current position, it still looked big, which showed its size. Apart from the egg, there was nothing else. It was strange, and for some reason, Steve became even more alert due to that. Sniper team, eyes on the egg. Destroy it, he ordered. He didn't believe things were that easy to settle. Even the UT Jin weren't this easy to settle. Yes. He had cheated by taking out their leader, aka their boss, even before the battle, but it still wasn't this easy. Soon Steve saw very small flashes of light from various locations in the forest that were barely noticeable. Along with the flashes came the specially designed soul-piercing bullets he had designed. They were designed like the armor-piercing bullets, but Steve saw them simply collapse in thin air. It was as though there was an unexplainable force around the egg that simply swatted them away like flies. Now that's more like it. Remain in position, we're moving in, Steve said before he and the other automata stood up and began walking into the clearing. His eyes never left the egg, but at the same time, his scanners provided constant 360 degrees information. As he got closer, he felt a weird sense of dread, fear creep into his heart, but it was normal. He was facing against a boss he knew nothing about. The treants were already a mystery of their own. Sir, something feels off, First said as Steve turned to him. What? Steve asked, but was met with dust. Literal dust. First had faded away. Turning to his other automatons, Steve was faced with the same issue. His automatons were turning to dust for some reason. Looking further into the forest at the sniper team, Steve saw the same situation. They were all gone. A human with the power of the administrator. A new voice was heard as Steve immediately fell to his knees.